各位 gentlemen，起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬。请坐下 ，Please be seated. Bill, I'm going to mute my microphone, and I should close the door over here. Please feel free to begin.
Thanks so much. Well, as we said earlier, it is just downright cold up here today, and it's been snowing off and on. Actually, where I live in Carmel, we've been blessed to have most of the snow go north of us, so we only got a couple of inches. But it's really going to be chilly this evening. This is definitely a day to be in Southern California. I swear to goodness, one of these days I'm going to move. This morning, or this evening, or this afternoon, depending upon where you're located, I felt compelled to talk about another illusion. This one, perhaps more difficult to spot than any other because we live in it every day and have ever since we were born. It's the illusion of time and the passage of time. It's interesting how our thoughts about the passage of time and our lives change with age as we get older and begin to understand more about living, and we get closer to dying. We begin to regard time differently. When we're born, of course, we're completely unaware of the existence of time in any kind of measurable sense. We don't care particularly that day follows night follows, day for years upon years. Even as a young child with the ability to remember those days, past the age of 5 or 6, we still don't give a lot of thought to the passage of time, or in our particular existence on this planet, the rather finite nature of the amount of time that we have here. It just doesn't even enter into our thought processes. We're concerned with playing and learning and going to school and growing and doing all the things that kids do. In adolescence, we're all remarkably invincible. We believe we have all the time in the world to do anything and everything we ever wanted to do. We are not only blissfully ignorant of our own mortality, but believe that we're essentially indestructible. It is the age of doing every stupid thing that we should never have done, and at least in my case are very thankful that I survived. I'm pretty sure we all have some of those moments. It's the time of the first phase of self-discovery, if you will. It's the rise from dependence to independence, from childhood to becoming an adult, hopefully. It's gaining the independence, confidence, and abilities to go out into the world and make a life. In young adulthood, we're so concerned with education, business, hopefully, finding someone to spend a life with, raising a family, acquiring stuff, all of those sorts of things, that we don't give a lot of time or a lot of thought to time and how much time's gone past us. Only in brief moments, kind of glimpses, when we stop and think of the past, do we really consider the amount of time that's gone past us. But somewhere in there, we start approaching the golden years, old age, if you will, the place where I'm getting to inexorably. I'm not quite sure when it starts, but I'm pretty sure about what it does to us. It becomes a time for reflection, where climbing the corporate ladder is no longer so much important as being able to climb down off the bed, where running the race to corporate success isn't quite as important as winning the race to the bathroom in the morning, where the eyes begin to fail, the reflexes slow down, the strength starts to wane, and you begin to realize you're not 21 anymore. Hopefully I still have a few years left ahead of me, but I've come to the very stark realization that enough years have gone past me that I am no longer 21 anymore. However, in my late 50s, I'm still able to teach Tai Chi very adequately, and I still have a fair amount of skill there, so I'm not too upset yet. And then as the last item on this list, and I wanted to think about right now, right this very second. Right now is the only place in our lives where we don't spend enough time. The older we get, the faster time seems to go by. The older we get, the more we realize that this physical existence, at any rate, is limited. The older we get, the more we try to coalesce knowledge and experience into wisdom. We find out that we're not invincible, that we're not indestructible, and that the processes of aging and the passage of time in this physical existence bring about certain changes that we're not always real enthusiastic about, but don't have very much control over. We divide our time up into 24-hour days, a natural cycle of the sun and the moon and the orbit of the earth around the sun. Our days, our weeks, our months, our years, a natural outcome of the rotation of an orbit of the earth. And so we have a day and a night, one that follows the other for a number of years. But there's a phenomena that in my life occurs anyway, that is independent of the passage of what we might call calendar or linear time. I remember very clearly being 5 years old. What I remember in particular was the day before, and I was just out on the sidewalk jumping over the cement blocks that made the sidewalk up. And I recall going to bed that night. When I woke up the next morning, I was 13 years old. That's happened to me several times. And it happens, I think, because we are not always fully present in the here and now. The here and now represents a collection of moments. And from the time I began to try to seriously understand and practice the Tao teachings, that collection of moments has taken on a much more refined edge, a lot more clarity, a lot more depth in meaning and purpose and image than I had before. You know, it feels to me that one day I went to bed and the next day I woke up older. Sorry, my go-to-meeting screen's giving me grief. I remember going to bed one day at 15 or 16 and waking up 21. I remember going to bed one day and waking up and being 50. And despite the increased present moment awareness, I've not been able to stop that phenomena from occurring. One of these days I'm going to go to bed and I'm going to wake up and I'll be, probably laying in a hospital somewhere preparing for this physical existence to end. And I will on that day have carried with me a collection of those moments in the here and now. And they'll all be very clear and they'll all be very wonderful. But this body will cease to function nonetheless. See, it's really all about our perception of time, our perception of what the time means to us, what we did with it, how we spent it, and where we're going in the future. I talk quite a bit about staying in the present moment, about being fully engaged and fully present in the here and now. But that certainly doesn't mean that we don't learn the lessons of the past nor plan for the future. It simply means that we need to be fully involved in what we're doing. In those spans of time in which I went to bed one age and woke up 10 or 20 years later, kind of like Rip Van Winkle, somehow I managed to go from invincible to fragile, from young and having all of my own teeth to being old and having some of them and not be real anymore, from knowledge to hopefully a certain amount of wisdom, and from a certain carelessness, a certain cavalier attitude regarding the passage of time to a certain amount of urgency to understand both the passage of time and what our real purpose is. I'm pretty clear on what my purpose is, and it's actually, fortunately, kind of been stated to me on a couple of occasions that I've taken very seriously. And it's part of the reason why I'm here every Sunday. But the hourglass never stops running. And when we stop to look at it as we get older, we realize that the sand at the top is a lot shallower than the sand at the bottom. I kind of think that if we wait until that day that we're about to die to make a decision about our spirituality, to determine what we're going to believe, to try and figure out what we should have done, we're kind of too late at that point. And yet very many people go through their lives without ever really gaining a grip on any kind of purpose or direction, other than to go out and try to acquire income and stuff and survive. I think just merely surviving in this existence is a poor way to spend the time that we've been given on this planet. As I said earlier, the days kind of run into weeks, run into months, run into years. And now and again, we find ourselves asking, where did all the time go? I think our minds kind of help us glaze over the passage of large amounts of time. In most situations, our brain fills in about 85 to 90% of everything that we see. Our brain focuses on what moves and what we need to know to not get hurt, to not get killed, to survive, to thrive. And so since it does that, most of the background, it just filters out and applies from what it's stored. And I think that function works very much the same way in the passages of long amounts of time. A lot of the memories from my earlier childhood, I am no longer completely sure are completely memories. And there is an ever-increasing body of academic thought that says that an awful lot of our earliest memories, the things that we hold dear and cherish, are part reality, part family stories or stories from other individuals, and part pure fabrication from the human mind. Where'd the time go? It went behind us. How did it happen so fast? Were we sleeping at the switch? Were we really awake? Who knows? I've had dreams that were so vivid and so real that until the moment I woke up, I could have sworn I was where I was dreaming. And then I woke up and I was, if you will, back in me again. It causes me occasionally to question the reality of this existence, kind of like Chuangzi in the story of the butterfly. I wonder if I was in the dream or if the dream was in me. So much of our time goes into that state where we're just functioning, where we're getting by from day to day without really putting any attention to how we got there. How the devil do we know if we were awake or asleep? Have any of you ever gotten in the car and driven somewhere, gotten there completely on autopilot, and then thought, wow, I didn't even think about this? I've done that. Not very often, but I have done it. Wasn't even really tired, wasn't impaired. You know, the stereo was playing, the car was moving, I knew where it was going, and my mind just zoned out to someplace else while it continued to operate the vehicle. And I didn't expect to get to where I was going quite so quickly. Covered the same amount of distance, just didn't seem to take as long. The less mindful we are of where we're going, how we're getting there, and how long it takes to get there, the more quickly that time goes by. And in this existence, we can't get that time back. It isn't ours. That's part of the illusion. Once again, we believe that we have some measure of control there, that we can choose how that time passes, that we can choose what's going to happen. But in reality, we can't. Not in this existence, not in this lifetime. But we see perception as reality. We think that our view of this existence is continually valid, that this reality that we're participating in is reality, to the exclusion of all other realities. And it begs the question, is this reality the only one there is? See, only humans mark the passage of time. And as much as we understand right now, we may find an intelligent life form out there in the universe popping around someplace who also does not mark the passage of time. But for the moment, we're what we know about. And we tend to think of time as a line from the past to the future, a completely linear quantity. But we already know that that perception is not reality either. And that time and space-time, is a continuum, that the two are virtually cannot be unentangled. We'll try the simplified English edition there. That they exist one on top of the other and they are completely intertwined. We know that space-time can be bent. We know that gravity affects it. And so our perception of that reality is already flawed by our own minds and our own perceptions. It is already an illusion. There's another facet to that passage of time that we need to consider, because it too is an illusion. At the end of that finite amount of time that we receive in this existence, we know the lights go out. We do not know what happens after they do. But there is a clue running around in quantum physics called a qubit. And while we're going to go for the extremely oversimplified explanation, just consider for the moment that as a bit is the smallest amount of classical information, it's a single binary digit, a 0 or a 1, a qubit represents the smallest value of a quantum state. It's not like classical information, but that's not important. What's important at the moment is that it represents the smallest bit of quantum information. And it has a couple of attributes. One of them is called no cloning, and the other one is called no deletion. Now, obviously these are theorems. They're postulations by people with far superior mathematics and physics knowledge than I have. But I think these two attributes are cool. What they say is, according to the law of the conservation of information, that this little tiny smallest unit of information cannot be cloned and it can't be destroyed. The law says that information has to be conserved. And we know that the microcosmic is a mirror of the macrocosmic. We know that the very large and the very small very often mirror each other. That the essence of this little tiny piece of information is that it cannot be exactly duplicated and it can't be completely destroyed. There's a second law called the law of the conservation of energy, and it says that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transformed or transferred from one object to another. These two nifty little laws of physics say that in our essence, we cannot be created or destroyed either. Okay? Time goes forever forwards and forever backwards to the very best that we know. If we go to the beginning of time, the Big Bang, the singularity, which is a wonderful term that basically means we have no idea what was here first. We accept that our perception of time started there and started moving forward. But in that continuum that is space-time, as far as we're concerned, that is an eternity, forever forwards, forever backwards, forever in every direction. Kind of like the Tao. The cool thing about that, the cool thing about these two laws, is that it lends an awful lot of credence to the indestructibility of the true self. Stephen Hawking postulates, in talking about black holes, which are one of his favorite topics, that if an individual were to be able to survive being drugged through a black hole, assuming one could survive being eternally bifurcated, which means whatever falls in gets pulled in half, that gets pulled in half, that gets pulled in half, forever, apparently. But if one could survive that to the singularity at the bottom of a black hole, we still would not be gone because of the laws of the conservation of energy and information. The fact that we existed, the fact that we made an imprint on this universe, no matter how small, says that that information must be preserved. The fact that we are a spiritual being, a being of light and of energy, the presence that we cannot explain, a spiritual entity that defies naming and explanation, says that in all likelihood, that true self cannot be lost. It can't be compromised. It can't be destroyed. So there are some real implications here in a forever state, if you want, because the truth is time is not finite. Our physical existence is finite. Time does not follow the constraints of our physical existence. We impose our thoughts and our wills, our illusory perception on time. The universe, the physical observable universe, may be finite, probably is finite at some point. Somewhere out there, there's a Big Bang, a singularity that we've not been able to touch, a point in time and space where we have not been able to go. As far as we're concerned, the universe is infinite, but we know the physical universe had a beginning and somewhere has an end. But the true self is not finite. It is eternal. The Tao itself is not finite. It's a principle. It's information. The true self and the Tao both, by our very own observation, must be preserved. The coolest thing about that is that the true self exists as information and as energy, and therefore, according to those two laws, it has to be conserved. We cannot just go out like a candle, never to be lit again. The information can't be lost. The energy cannot be destroyed. Consciousness itself exists as information and energy, and therefore must be conserved. That means that that part of us that we can describe, the part of us that perhaps represents our personality, that represents the essence of who and what we believe we are, also must be conserved. And so perhaps there's room for a hope that says that the true self preserves not only the essence of the person, but perhaps also the consciousness, the ability to learn from negative karma, to change one's circumstances, to be different in the next lifetime than this one. All of those impacts are potential thoughts, potential hopes in that universe where energy and information has to be conserved. The truth, whether those things hold up or not over time, is that time doesn't have any effect on the true self. It only affects the physical body. It only affects the physical existence. It has no effect on the Tao. The Tao was the same when the singularity that brought this universe into existence went off, and it will be the same when the last star in this universe goes out. Physicality has no effect on the true self. The condition of this body can change, and over time it will. I will continue to age. I'll probably lose a couple more teeth. You know, one of these days, I may not be able to teach, but I will as long as I can stand up. But all of those processes of aging and the demise of this physical body has absolutely no effect on my true self. And in fact, the older I get, hopefully, with work and practice and diligence and a lot of education and help from my Tao brothers and sisters and the masters at the temple there, you know, I'm going to get closer to actually mastering some of the Tao teaching, so that perhaps next time around I'm a little better at this. Now, I realize the last sentence here isn't directly to point, but it bears mentioning that only the mind can access the true self in a person. It is what we learn, what we think, what we know, what we work at, the things that we, through our will and our self-discipline, cause ourselves to become and to be, that access that true self, that allows that true self to emerge. And so no matter what, you know, we still have to choose. In the here and now, we know we began life completely unaware of the passage of that time. We become aware of the passage of time as we age, as it goes past us. The older we get, the more we become aware of our own frailty, the impending mortality, our own lack of wisdom, the speed with which that time goes past us, and how little wisdom we actually collect for the years that we put in. What is it they say? We grow too soon old and too late wise. And so the older we get, the more we question our own spirituality, the more we fear death, because we don't understand it, because we don't know what's on the other side of it. No matter what our spirituality is, nobody living can tell us what happens after we die. We only know what we believe. But for those of us that have the affinity for the Tao teachings, and for those out there who might be within earshot of my voice or Derek's or someone else's, understand that that anxiety and fear can be replaced by wisdom and a clearer hope for what might happen. And that passage of time ceases to be an enemy and simply becomes the way of nature, the way that things work. That aging and dying become natural processes and not things to be feared. That worrying about some kind of eternal punishment or glorification, really, if we think about it, doesn't hold much water. That every living thing on this planet ages and dies at some point. And then our spirituality can become the hope of renewal and the accrual of more positive karma, and living becomes an awakening process. One where we're both much more present in the here and now, and hopefully one day are fully enlightened. You know, as it goes, time really isn't an agent of change, it's a vehicle for us. It doesn't cause change on its own so much as it transports us to where we can consider and cause change for ourselves. Yeah, our physical bodies are going to undergo changes due to the passage of time, and those things we're not going to be able to stop. But the truly important parts of ourselves, the parts that don't change, still have to have the experiences in order to affect change. So knowing that, then the passage of time is only a reality if one's looking at it. And it's good to look at it now and again. But from a different perspective, time can be that essential and eternal continuum that eventually brings us around to a place of spiritual enlightenment. It is the passage of that time in this lifetime that helps to bring us to that point of understanding and wisdom. And I don't know about all of you, but I think so far it's been a wonderful and very blessed ride. And I don't have many regrets for having gone on the trip. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have a great Sunday. Thank you for letting me share with you.
Bill, thank you. And what a big topic this is. Space, time, you know, the universe, the ultimate fate of the universe, the Tao, physics, everything. This is, well, it's one of my favorite topics, and I, like to geek out on discussing it. However, my wife will usually shut me down and tell me to stick closer to reality and to daily life, because that's more applicable for everyone.
Yeah, Paige just tells me to shut up.
And I do know, though, whenever we touch on this kind of topics, we always get very positive feedback from the internet, like, hey, this is fascinating, quantum mechanics, that's fascinating. Why can't we talk about that more? Well, okay. So let me share with everyone a couple of interesting things. There are some happenings in the future that we can calculate using just mathematics and physics, using our knowledge based on the past. We can predict the future. However, when I talk about the future, this will be incredibly distant in the future. Perhaps none of us will stick around that long to see it. And I say perhaps because there is a small chance that some of us will actually achieve immortality within this lifetime. That's kind of a shocking news all by itself to people to contemplate the possibility of immortality. There are futurists that's been talking about the various developments and various levels of understanding that science has achieved on the mechanism of aging. So, and when you understand how the mechanism works, you have possibilities of slowing it down. And when you slow it down, thus extending your lifespan beyond the 80 years or so that you are currently expecting, then you can stick around longer for science to make further progress to further extend that. So it then it then becomes not impossible, not totally impossible for you to get to like 150. And if you can get to that long, there may be other things that come into play. There will be, within probably several decades, we will have, nanoscale machines, gazillion of them floating within our bloodstream that will be repairing cellular damage, etc., which will further retard the damaging process of aging. So this is all mind-boggling stuff. It's actually contemplated as possibilities within our lifetime. There is a term So the term that you use, Bill, singularity, from astronomy, astrophysics, etc., there are some scientists that are borrowing that term to mean something completely different, to forecast a technological development singularity that's coming up. And what that means, especially people who look at this, have noticed that recently there's been multiple news items. There's a warning from Stephen Hawking about the development of artificial intelligence. There's actually a news item recently from Bill Gates, who thinks that it could pose a danger. All of this just on the verge of the year 2015, which is going to see another Terminator movie. Now, and there's a bunch of very smart scientists working for Microsoft who say, no, the development of artificial intelligence will not lead to danger, etc. So we have basically some brilliant minds that say it's dangerous, and some that say that it won't be dangerous. That's where we are today. And when we talk about singularity, by the way, this is just a little more geeking out for those of you who are paying attention to such things. It's what happens when we succeed in programming machines that can improve itself. So think about that for a moment. We've already had learning machines for some time. That's been around in computer science for several decades. We have machines that can increase their knowledge. Now, you cross a threshold when you get to a place when you can design a machine that has the ability to redesign itself. That becomes smart enough to reinvent itself. Then all bets are off, because the machine will force itself upon its own agenda of evolution, which will occur at a rate that is millions of times faster than natural evolution, and therefore, literally within probably minutes, that machine intelligence will be beyond anything that human beings are capable of. Compared to that type of artificial intelligence, human beings will be sort of like colony ants compared to a human being, in that the insects cannot even contemplate what human beings are capable of or what human beings are thinking of. It'll be that kind of gap between ourselves and a future artificial intelligence. And that's what Stephen Hawking and Bill Gates are talking about, just to kind of boil it down to the bare essentials. So, big topics. Some quick examples for everybody. According to calculations, 7 million years from now, Mount Rushmore will have eroded away. When you calculate the rate at which it erodes, you can see that pretty much it'll be done in 7 million years. Also, Phobos, which is one of the moons of Mars, in a little bit more than that, 7.6 million years from now, it'll be calculated to be ripped apart by Mars gravity. And the sun itself will get bigger and bigger as it grows older. Now, people ask, "Hey, Derek, will sun explode in a supernova explosion and then shrink into a black hole?" No, you'll be relieved to find out that won't happen, only because the sun isn't big enough for that. A star will have to have many times the mass of the sun in order to have a supernova explosion and then collapse into a black hole. The sun has a different fate. Before it actually dies, it will expand, which will result in lethal levels of gamma radiation here on Earth, and it'll also begin to boil away the ocean. So by 150 million years from now, the Atlantic Ocean will begin to close. Most of the water will be gone. And at a billion years from now, the Earth will be too hot to support liquid water. So that's the eventual fate of life on Earth. 5 billion years from now, the sun will expand to the size of a red giant, and then 12 billion years from now, it shrinks to become a black dwarf, not a black hole, a black dwarf from a red giant. That's that's really, really distant in the future. And by the way, something we know about the universe is that only 10 to 20 years ago, people weren't sure about the universe expanding and how it expands, how fast it is expanding, etc. There were many theories. As I was growing up, there were many theories as to the eventual fate of the universe. One of the popular ones being the Big Crunch. That is, the universe itself will expand from the Big Bang, and then at some point, reverse direction, collapse back in to the Big Crunch in the distant future. That theory, now we know, can never happen. And the reason is because the universe has expanded from the Big Bang, and not only is it not slowing down, it's actually expanding faster and faster. The exact mechanism, we have no idea. Dark energy, dark matter, whatever, there's some kind of an anti-gravity force that pushes it outward more and more. That just means we become ever more distant from neighboring galaxies. So there's no mechanism to achieve any kind of warp drive that is realistic, and therefore we may never be able to visit a different galaxy or a different star system. And one day, it will expand to the point where only the local cluster is visible to us. We won't be able to see any other galaxies. And it will further beyond that, and we're talking about a big number, like the number of years will be 10 followed by 100 zeros, that kind of big number, at which point we won't be able to see any stars whatsoever, but then there won't be an Earth for us to see stars from, so that's okay. So scientists say that, well, that's going to be, that's the end of the stellar era, it's the black hole era of the universe. The universe ends up becoming one giant dark place, no light whatsoever. So, wow, even then the Tao will still exist, which is how we managed to find out about all of these things happening into the future. So we can spend hours and hours talking about stuff like this, talking about what scientists know today. But I think, at the end of the day, my wife is right. We have to pull ourselves back to today, to now, to the present time, and to think about how we're going to live today and tomorrow, and not a billion, trillion, gazillion years from now. So, so Bill, your talk had a very nice combination of the distant future and also concerns about living today. Thank you for that.
Thank you.